Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's panel on transforming how we travel, Labour's priorities for transport. Firstly, my thanks to Transport and Environment for supporting this event this morning. I'm joined by a fantastic and quite large panel today to tackle this very important topic. Welcome to Simon Lightwood MP, to Mayor Oliver Copard, to Anna Krajinska of Transport and Environment, to Maya Singer-Hobbs and Marcus Johns, doing a double act from IPPR, and we'll be joined by Ruth Cadbury MP very shortly. I'll come to our panellists to give their opening remarks, and then we'll open it up to the floor for some questions. Firstly, I'm very, very pleased to welcome Simon Lightwood MP. MP for Wakefield and Rothwell, previously Shadow Transport Minister. Simon is now Parliamentary Undersecretary of State for Local Transport. And we're really pleased to have you with us this morning, Simon, so thank you very much, and I'll invite you to open.
Thank you very much. Oh, it's good, isn't it? It's nice not having a handheld. Good morning, I'm Simon Lightwood, and I'm as I said, the Minister for Local Transport. It's a privilege to be asked to be here this morning with a fantastic panel, I have to say, with incredible experts and people with real, tangible experience in transport. It's also a privilege to be alongside I hope soon, the newly elected chair of the Select Committee, on her way.
She's on her way.
On her way, Ruth Cadbury is en route as well, and Ruth has always been a formidable advocate for transport. In fact, the government is already working at pace on a huge range of areas: rail reform, devolution of bus powers, ensuring infrastructure works for the whole of the country, and supporting local authorities to fix roads for the long term. These are all initiatives that are already underway, still just 11 weeks into a Labour government, so already hit the ground running. Transport runs through every one of the government's 5 missions to promote national renewal. Healthier, sustainable travel is vital because transport is quite often and rightly described as a great enabler. It's the difference between opportunity and isolation for millions of people. But to get there, we need a route and branch reform of our transport network, spanning every mode of transport. Reform is essential because of the inheritance that was left to us from the previous government. The Tories' failed experiment with prioritised rail has caused passengers misery and cost the taxpayer millions, whilst 14 years of the Tories' broken bus system has failed countless communities and led to a spiral of decline in bus services. Our missions are about nothing short of national renewal, and change will not happen overnight, and it will not be easy, but the opportunities are immense. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Absolutely agree that does deserve a round of applause, a good kick-off. Oliver, I'll come to you next. Oliver Copard is the Mayor of South Yorkshire, born and raised in the region. Oliver took office in 2022 and was re-elected in May 2024. And I'd like you to open your remarks.
Thank you very much. Never have I pined more for the weather of South Yorkshire than when I've been in Liverpool, Costa del South Yorkshire. Look, my opening statement, I suppose, would just focus on 2 things in this context around transport. Why we're so focused on transport in South Yorkshire is for 2 reasons. One, because I've said South Yorkshire should be the healthiest region in the country. And I say that knowing full well the scale of that challenge, not just in terms of what that means if we were to get there, but knowing where we are today. Where we are today is a place with a 20-year healthy life expectancy gap. So if you're from one of our poorer communities, you're likely to get too sick to work in your mid-50s, whereas if you live in somewhere that's a bit wealthier in South Yorkshire, you can work right through to your 70s. A baby born in Rotherham today is likely to die 5 years younger than a baby born in a wealthy part of London. And 1/3 of our productivity challenge in South Yorkshire when it comes to economic growth is down to health and health inequalities. So if we want to fix that problem, we have to give people the opportunity to be healthier. We have to create the social determinants, the social context that allows them to have that sense of possibility, that sense of health and wealth. And all of those things are intimately connected. So it's hugely important that we focus on travel as a solution to that problem. And for instance, one of the things that we've done in South Yorkshire, in Sheffield in particular, that I've been a huge supporter of, despite the fact that technically it's not part of my remit, is the clean air zone. 1 in 20 deaths in South Yorkshire is down to polluted air. So we've introduced a clean air zone. It was a big political challenge, as you can imagine, but it was the right thing to do. And it was the right thing to do because if this was water coming out of our taps that was killing 1 in 20 people, it would be a national outrage. But because it is air and it is invidious and it is invisible, we don't talk about it in the same way. But we should, because it is killing people. So fixing that problem is ultimately down to what we do around transport. The second reason is because it's to do with freedom and choice. I think we've got the messaging on this wrong. I think we talk about this as though it's some sort of like moral crusade to bring in a bike lane. And it isn't, frankly. I am agnostic about how we solve some of these problems, but what I am not agnostic about is giving people freedom and choice about how they travel and move. And I think that is the way to talk about this subject. We are not trying to stop people from doing things. We are about giving people more opportunity, more choice. And I think it's really important that we get the language right. So let me briefly just talk about the 3 things we are doing. Bus franchising, moving at pace to reform our bus network. Hugely important that we get more people onto public transport. The bus decline is real. It is a big challenge for colleagues to fix. The funding has gone down, our journeys have gone down, transport costs have gone up on the bus network, and we need to fix it through bus reform. The tram network has now been brought back under public control in South Yorkshire for the first time in nearly 30 years. I did that earlier this year. We've already seen revenues go up by 5%, fare evasion has gone down by 90%. We're now ambitious, if we get a little bit of money out of the government, just saying, to extend and renew our tram network. Feel free to ask questions about that, because that is hugely important to our ambitions. And then on active travel, we're doing big and bold things. We've got a plan for over 600 square miles of active travel networks. We've got Ed Clancy, the 3-time Olympic champion, and from Barnsley as our active travel champion. We're working really closely with Active Travel England and Sport England to do some of this work, but not just the hard infrastructure of putting in bike lanes and Dutch roundabouts, but also the soft infrastructure of behaviour change and allowing people to see that that freedom and choice is real, that actually just through small interventions and through small changes in lifestyle, you can actually make a big difference to how you feel. So that's what we're doing in South Yorkshire. It is deeply, deeply important to me personally, but also in terms of the political project that we've embarked on in South Yorkshire in terms of creating a healthier and wealthier and happier community. And we can't do it without support from the government, which is why I'm so pleased to see people like Simon and Louise, one of our local MPs, to be taking on this brief, because I know they care passionately about it.
Thank you so much for that, Oliver, for those reflections and provocations. Thank you very much. I'll come to Anna now. Anna Krajinska is the UK Director of Transport and Environment, Europe's leading advocacy group for clean transport and energy. Anna.
Great, thank you very much. We are proud supporters of shared, active and public mobility. And I'd really like to focus my contribution on 2 things. We have our sister organisation, the Clean Cities campaign, working on ensuring fair access to e-bikes, e-scooters and shared e-mobility cars, which are really key for ensuring fair access, affordable access to e-mobility. Not only do they improve our cities because they use less space, there's less air pollution, it makes our cities a more pleasant place to live, but crucially on those transport modes we can move fast. They don't require a huge expensive rollout of infrastructure. They simply need the right regulation to get there. But at the moment, for example, with a private e-scooter, you cannot legally drive that on the road in the UK, which I think is a scandal because you can drive a huge 2-ton polluting SUV. The last government was supposed to address this through the transport bill. As many things, that never materialised. And we see this as a really big opportunity for the new Labour government to go fast and ensure fair, affordable access to mobility for everyone in the UK. But coming to my second point, we know that the shift to shared and public mobility isn't going to do all of the heavy lifting when it comes to fixing our climate crisis. And for that, we need the structural change to come from the transport sector. We need to move to electric cars, electric trucks, we need to have clean fuels for shipping, and we need clean fuels for aviation as well. But in that transition, we need to make sure that we bring everyone with us. It can't just be that only the rich get to travel. So what this means for the transport sector is that we need to make sure that for those people that do have to rely on a car, for whatever reason that may be, that they have access to affordable e-mobility. Now, over the last few years, car makers have really focused on electrifying the biggest, the most expensive cars. And that has meant that the price of EVs hasn't decreased as fast as it could have. They haven't focused on electrifying the small cars, the cars that the majority of working people buy in the UK. So we need some regulation to force car makers to bring affordable models to the market for those people who unfortunately can't shift to public transport or shared mobility. And for that, we need a weight tax to tax the biggest and the most polluting cars. As well as that, we also need to reform our vehicle excise duty to make sure that, again, it's the polluting cars that pay, and people are able to access affordable e-mobility where they can. Later on, I also want to focus on a few other aspects, like the need to reverse the fuel duty cut, the need to set up clean freight zones in cities to support cutting air pollution across cities, and also targeted support for leasing of electric cars for small businesses, for individuals where they absolutely need access to them, like carers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. And I'm now really pleased to welcome Ruth Cadbury MP. Ruth is the Member of Parliament for Brentford and Isleworth since 2015, and she's also the chair of the Transport Committee, and we're really pleased to have you with us here today, Ruth. So over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me, and apologies that I've been late. I think a lot of the why we're doing this and some examples that I might have covered have already been covered, and I'm really pleased to see Simon here, and I'm sorry I missed him, but I probably agree with everything you said. And good luck to you, but as the newly elected chair of the Transport Select Committee, we will be your critical friend and holding you to account. So I was on the Transport Select Committee for over 5 years until a year ago. And one of the pieces of work we did that I think was pretty well received, even by people in the Tory government, was on active travel. They did implement some recommendations, and they created Active Travel England and gave them a budget. And then less than a year later, they decimated that budget. And I know that's obviously will be on Simon and Lou Haig's in tray. Hopefully, rather than having to be yet another thing on the list to Rachel for more money from Treasury, hopefully you can find the money internally from within the DFT, because per mile travel, per person, etc., active travel and a lot of particularly local travel, decarbonising local travel is so much more cost effective than building more road capacity and even maintaining the national road network. So I, as many people here know, I co-chaired a number of Transport APPG, all-party parliamentary groups, including for 8 years the Cycling and Walking APPG, and I don't hold an agenda for any particular mode of transport. To me, our transport system needs to be looked at as a whole. It needs to be integrated, it needs to be reliable, it needs to be accessible, safe, and above all, sustainable, which is where we are today. And I was really taken by the exam questions you set us on, particularly poverty and fairness in the solutions, because we've got some really bizarre, really bizarre counterintuitive mechanisms at the moment. It's ludicrous that if I want to buy a bike through the Cycle to Work scheme as a high-in earner, I get a massive discount on the cost of that bike. And yet, somebody who isn't even in work and is looking to get work and needs to be able to, the buses have gone where they live and they need a bike to get to work, they can't access that unless they have a very generous employer. And many employers aren't even signed up to cycle to work. What France did, and I think, is it Germany or Netherlands, I can't remember, basically some years ago, partly to get that shift and make it a progressive shift rather than an unprogressive one that cycle to work is. What they did was they gave grants, €200 grants, to help kickstart the electric bike market, and a €200 grant for purchasing e-bikes, which the idea was, I don't know whether it worked or not, I'm sure there's answers, somebody knows, the idea was to kickstart that industry, help the market in order to bring down costs in the long term. It was fixed term or fixed budget, I can't remember which. But one of the things that we learnt from that is that the people who took most advantage of that grant to buy an e-bike were actually generally women, often driving the second car in a home, and they swapped the second car for an e-bike. Which I thought was really interesting. So the other point I wanted to make is around change. And as a former long-term councillor in Hounslow and now one of the MPs for Hounslow, and Ruth Mayorkas there will talk for Europe about this, but Hounslow was brave, and we had a former leader who never rode a bike, but he decided he was absolutely going to go and work with TfL on implementing low-traffic neighbourhoods and segregated cycle paths through the borough. And particularly in Chiswick, we got a lot of verbal social media pushback, as many of you will have experienced, but the councillors held firm, I held firm, and what actually happened was that in an election in one ward, which Labour had not had a seat for 48 years, it was our non-target ward. We just, Amy was not planning to be a councillor. We put one leaflet out. We focused on another ward, which we actually didn't win. We focused on another ward. So what happened? We now have a Labour councillor in Chiswick Riverside, and she's wonderful. But that's the silent majority actually going. And so, by the way, they'd already lived in the low-traffic neighbourhood that was implemented using Boris Johnson's emergency measures for COVID, which actually the one good thing I think he ever did. Hounslow went with that, implemented the scheme that had been on consultation and detailed planning for several years, implemented it using the COVID emergency legislation. So, from that point on, mid-2020, people in the Riverside, in the south part of Chiswick, were living in a low-traffic neighbourhood and actually quite liked it. And they therefore voted, I believe, a major reason we won that one councillor was for that reason. Not the people, you don't go online to say, actually, my kids quite like the low-traffic neighbourhood, because you're just going to get a stream of invective, and only a few brave souls do that. But the ballot box, I think, helped us there. So that's my message for politicians and community campaigners, is actually, I believe that if schemes are well designed, fit for purpose, there are alternatives, then actually the majority of people like them. Frankly, I like the idea of just implementing it, see how it worked, and then be prepared to tweak or even remove if you really have to, but only if it doesn't work not in an emotional sense, but in an actual sense. And Hounslow did do 2 tweaks on the LTNs in Chiswick. They removed one vehicle closure road, and they did a hours of operation restriction on another retail street, so that vehicles could drive and park, so that benefited the retail shops during the working day, but evenings and weekends, it's now open for tables and chairs to go on the pavement, so that the pubs and restaurants on that road benefit. So, I thought that was a really good solution. I think that's probably all I want to say, because I suspect that all the overhead stuff has probably been saying, I haven't got an agenda at the moment. Obviously, you've heard some of my personal agenda, but the Transport Committee doesn't meet till mid-November when all the members are elected, and we'll devise our programme and work on what we think are the most important and urgent priorities in order to devise our programme for the year ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ruth. Linking some of those big ideas to some really tangible examples there was really appreciated. I'm going to turn now to Maya Singer-Hobbs, who's a Senior Research Fellow at IPPR. Maya's based in our Economy and our Environment team. Maya.
So the disadvantage of going at the end of, well, near the end of a long group of people is that lots of my points were already covered. But the advantage is that I get to plug other people's in the sector's great work, which comes directly to your point, Ruth, about access to bikes for people on low incomes. And Sustrans just published a really, really great report that was looking at exactly how you can do that. And they did loads of modelling. And you should go and talk to Dan at the end, because he could tell you much more about it than I could. But I would be a bad member of the community if I didn't plug someone else's good work. I was going to touch on lots of the things that have been touched on. So I don't think anyone here needs to be told that there's an urgent need to decarbonise our transport system. Emissions have been pretty static for the past 30 years or more. We know that electric vehicles are going to shift some of those emissions, but they're not going to go fast enough or far enough. And the key thing about electric vehicles is that they're not going to address the sort of deep inequalities in our transport system. Earlier this year, we at IPPR did some modelling looking at transport emissions across the population. And we were sort of looking at demographics and where people live and how they travel. And again, this isn't going to come as a surprise to anyone, but there are a group of very high earners who have completely unrestricted mobility. And then way down at the other end of the spectrum, you have people usually living on low incomes who really can't get around. And this speaks to the points that you were both making about opportunity and health and place. And so we sort of took that modelling and sort of complemented it with some polling and quite a lot of participatory work. And we've been speaking to people about what they want to see from the transport system. And often it comes back to a sense of place and wanting to feel like you can get around safely. So there's sort of 2 points within that I'm gonna pull out on. One, well, we sort of identified when we were talking to people 3 big interventions to reduce transport emissions. So one of those is thinking a bit about aviation emissions, and I don't think we're going to touch on that here. But aviation emissions is one of them. One of them is thinking about the shift to EVs, and the third is about more active and public transport. Marcus is going to talk about public transport, but I was going to talk a little bit about the active travel point and how that relates to sort of the clean air agenda and then people's sense of place. When we talk to people, they say, if you say, what would your community look like if we tackled clean air? They would say, people say, and this includes young people, we spoke to sort of young adults who were saying, I'd know my neighbours and there'd be trees on the street and I'd be able to get to school. These are the people that everyone says, they just want to look at their phones all the time. And I think it comes to the points that have been made already about the narrative and how we talk about these communities and how we talk about what we're doing, and really making sure that we have people have access to a range of transport options, so that we're not building car-dependent communities. We're making sure that people have access to a bus, or they can, walk their kids to school without being worried about a lack of pavement. Or if you're a wheelchair user, you can get down off the curb and get to where you need to go. And these are small things, but they contribute both to a sense of place and the opportunity point and help shift our emissions. And I'm going to stop it there because I was told to keep this short.
Thank you very much, Maya. I'm going to go straight to Marcus, who's also a Senior Research Fellow at IPPR, based in IPPR North.
Thank you, Becca. Good morning, everybody. One of the benefits of actually going last is that I can echo the remarks that have come before. And I think one thing that's really clear to me from the conversation we're having is the centrality of transport to so many of the kind of societal issues and the political issues that we collectively face. And I think it is really positive to see quite central to what we are seeing from this government since the start of the parliamentary session, the prioritisation of transport and a number of quite significant interventions coming forward. I just want to come to buses in particular, because I think buses are something that are present in every community. I think they can play an outsized role in our net zero transition, and in terms of the communities that they serve, they are particularly crucial in addressing poverty, particularly for those who are unable to access economic opportunity. Just in terms of that ability to contribute to our net zero goal collectively, IPPR did some modelling last year looking at what it would look like if every one of England's major cities had London-level bus services in an all-electric bus fleet, and we compared what those emissions look like compared to the DfT's baseline of what they think is likely to happen. And we found that improvement and the modal shift that attracted could lead to a reduction of around 18% in annual emissions by 2030, which is not too far behind the 20% that we need to see if we're going to stay within our carbon budget. But I think really crucially for communities is that buses are a very tangible and palpable thing, and I think this is something that I hope the government in particular considers, is that they're very visible, right? They're coming down your road. They're in every community. If you think about Greater Manchester as an example already, you can't walk down 2 streets without passing a yellow bus, many of which are increasingly electric, and feel that change. And I think that is something that is of political benefit to councils, to mayors, and to the government, that by the end of this parliament, we could see really significant change in our communities in the way that they travel on those buses, but also the benefits that can be accessed by those communities in terms of economic opportunity, in terms of many of the missions government have accessing key public services. I think that's why I really welcome the government's decision to prioritise buses, their 5-point bus plan, their plans to increase local control, public ownership, and better standards. They could be a really good success by the end of this parliament if well designed and well funded. And I think to make sure they're well designed, we do need to see a real integrated strategy, as Ruth said, that dual transition, not just improving buses, but decarbonising the bus fleet as well. We want to empower local leaders, absolutely, but within a shared national vision of what transport can provide for communities and what communities should be able to expect, and credible long-term and short-term funding. And I think particularly for short-term funding, we face a number of looming financial cliff edges that I think we desperately want to avoid if we're to make sure that kind of longer-term improvements in buses aren't derailed in the first instance before we can really get them off the ground. So I think we are seeing really good progress since July. I am particularly fond of the move fast and fix things approach. I am hoping over time that moves to something like think big and back it up.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Thank you to all of our panellists. We're now going to open up to some questions from the floor. What we'll do is we'll take see eager hands shooting up, fantastic. We'll take a few questions. I will sort of direct those across the panel. Panellists, if there's one you want to come in and I don't direct it to you, then do please feel free to flag and let me know that you want to chip in. That's great. Gosh, what a lot of hands, fantastic. Emma, yeah, there, and in the red top at the front row, and then to your right with the glasses.
Hi, my name's Pam Richards. I'm from Bath, and there've been very malicious rumours in the Tory press about the bus passes for pensioners being cancelled or altered. Now, these are invaluable. You only have to travel on a bus regularly to know, it's full of pensioners. It's important for their independence, and it's very beneficial, obviously, to people who are poor and don't have access to other modes of transport. It actually stops people driving because there's a convenient bus and it's free. You're not going to drive. And obviously, it helps the bus companies in terms of their financial success. And of course, if they went, it would be an absolute electoral disaster. So can I have some reassurance, and I'm looking at the MP, that this is actually all just a Daily Mail fiction?
Thank you. My name's Sarah Courtney. I'm a lead member for Regeneration and Transport on Calderdale Council in West Yorkshire, and I'm also sit on the West Yorkshire Combined Authority Transport Committee. It's a new role for me, and I got told off by the chair in a private session, luckily not in, don't think so big. You're not the Transport Secretary, so. You are. Well, not quite, but anyway. Well, first of all, I'd like to say cities important, but don't forget rural areas, because rural areas are often close to cities and can transport people into cities. But we also have our own economies and our sort of maybe SME sort of economies that are innovative and creative and actually also really important. So don't forget the rural areas. But I would just say, what can you do to be visionary, to be really big, to think big? You know, we subsidise massive road infrastructure projects to the tune of millions and billions. Could you know, things like through ticketing and you know, sort of free passes for. It would be brilliant to see a national transport system that's connected. That doesn't matter where you are, your tickets will work. You can have tap on, tap off, and there'll be a capped fare. Free transport for all under 18s, so could we be visionary and make free public transport for areas? You know, how do we get people back onto buses? How do we get people back onto public transport? And please, will you dream big?
Thank you.
Hello, Vincent Stopps. I'm an ex-councillor from the London Borough of Hackney. In Hackney, more people cycle to work than go by car, a unique thing. We have 95% of our residents use, the mode share is bus, rail, cycle and walk. I want to talk a little bit about some of the...
Can I ask you to keep it to a question?
Okay. The dishonesty of the cycling lobby that is dominating the streets agenda in this country is really corrupting debate. Can we have some honest research and honest figures about the various growth figures in cycling so we can get a decent transport policy?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Simon, if I come to you first to possibly debunk the Daily Mail conspiracy theory, if that's correct, if we know on that, maybe we can tackle that one briefly.
Well, I'm absolutely happy to say no truth in it whatsoever. We're absolutely committed to those. It's really frustrating that those rumours have been persisting, but we have no plans, and we are committed to continue with that and recognise the value that they place.
Fantastic, thank you. If I could then invite you to comment on the idea of being visionary, and then I'll come to Oliver for that as well, but Simon, being visionary and free public transport, question mark.
Well, this question comes from a Calderdale council, of which I used to be. So you could be a transport minister. I mean, really, you touched on free transport, didn't you, as well? And I think there's obviously decisions to be made there with just a £2 fare cap at the moment on buses. So we're looking very carefully at what that has achieved. But obviously, we're working in a very tight financial envelope, a £22 billion black hole. So we're looking at now, should that be more targeted at young people, for instance? With young people, I think that's a prime opportunity to really establish and ingrain behaviours, that next generation of bus users. But also, and I totally accept, as a former Calderdale councillor in Ludden and Foot, where your colleague is sitting there who followed me, that rural areas must be remembered. And I think that's why it's so important that funding and decisions on transport should be made at a local level by people that understand the community, understand those challenges, and are better placed than anybody sitting in Whitehall or Westminster about what works for that local community, because there is no one-size-fits-all rule for that.
I'd like to come in here, if that's all right, on the funding issue, because the big elephant in the room is how do we pay for all of these great things that we want? And we've heard that there's a 22 billion black hole in the budget to fill. And one area that is criminally undertaxed is transport, and often the most polluting forms of transport. So, for example, in aviation, fuel is not taxed. So anyone filling up their car pays more than BA has ever, for example, paid. You using fuel to heat your house, electricity, you're paying more tax. So if we started taxing aviation, the government could have collected up to £6 billion in revenue last year. On fuel duty, we had the fuel duty cut. That's costing £2 billion a year. But that hasn't been passed on to consumers. It hasn't helped probably anyone in this room, because data shows that actually it's been pocketed by the fuel retailers. So there's £2 billion going straight from the government into big oil. So if we look at taxing the most polluting modes of transport, then maybe we have more opportunity to fund these great schemes on the ground and other ones that help access affordable mobility across the UK.
Thank you, Anna. Oliver, I'd like to invite you to comment on the visionary piece, and then I'll come to you.
Can I just sort of push back a little bit against that, if only because it's more interesting if we don't all agree.
Oh yeah, we want a panel with a little bit of disagreement.
Right,
in it.
which is
Absolutely.
to say, look, some of my community people who live in South Yorkshire want to go on holiday to Jamaica or Benidorm or Tenerife or Italy or wherever you want to go, right? Like 2 weeks in your summer holidays. The idea that we're going to make that more expensive while some people travel an hour in a private jet to go to a concert, frankly feels bonkers. Like, we need to find a mechanism, of course, to tax aviation and some of these modes of transport, but it needs to be in a way which isn't just a blanket system, potentially, for instance, on fuel tax on aviation. I'm not saying it's not an idea, but I just think we have to do this in a way which is progressive and equitable.
I think Ruth will come on this point.
Okay,
as
brilliant.
well.
Yeah, okay. But we also have to find ways to pay for things. So that is a fair comment. Look, just on the visionary point, I saw some really interesting data the other day about South Yorkshire, which said when bus fares for young people were 30 to 40p, we had about 1.6 million journeys per year. When they went from 40p to 80p, which was an overnight switch, we went down to about 600,000 journeys. So price is definitely part of the solution, which is why in South Yorkshire we're aiming to introduce free travel for young people. But there is a question mark about just how far you should go, and it speaks to the question about free passes for older people, because actually one of the things that has been noticeable in the shift since the pandemic is older people have not got back on the bus. So the gap in people using the bus and not using the bus between before and after COVID is about 25% in South Yorkshire. We've lost about 25% of the market. A large part of that is down to older people not using the bus anymore. And older people, as you say, have free bus passes. So it's a question mark, and I don't think we know enough. So one of the ways in which I think we need to be radical is to invest much more in data and understanding about their behavioural economics around bus travel and active travel as well. Because actually, until we understand what that looks like in terms of fares, but also in terms of routes, we're not going to be able to properly develop and design a network which actually gets more people onto buses and getting them using public transport. The network redesign that we need has to be reliant on data and an understanding of where buses are needed and where they should go and what times. And in that way, I think we can both be more efficient with the resources we have and more effective at moving more people in a short space of time. One of the questions I have, and this is a question I want to kind of pose to researchers in the room, what is the ideal cost of a bus fare? Because no one can tell me the answer to that question. Because there is an ideal price point, my A-level basic economics tells me, where you get more people on the bus, but you're charging people less for that bus journey, but also increasing revenues. I don't know what that number is, but I would really be interested if somebody could tell me the number.
Do you know that?
No pressure.
Maya and Marcus are a tiny bit panicked at that point. I mean, certainly we have, at RPPR, we have done research on bus fares, and we'll have more to come. We are advocates for free local public transport. We've called for that in previous work. But I want to come to Ruth.
Yes. I mean, a couple of the examples you gave about visionary transport, tap in, tap out, daily cap, and free travel for young people.
You got it.
We've had in London for quite a long time. And,
It's almost like there's a divide.
Us over and we get daily public transport over 60 is free on all modes. After 9 a.m. and then after, but 9:30 on the rail. So some of this stuff isn't visionary, but people have also said, I think we probably need to be more visionary of thinking of different ways of running rural public transport.
Yeah.
Maybe not having a bus timetable with a big bus that might come along every now and then, and learn from other parts of the world which have much more zippy, consumer connected services, but they do have to be accessible. And I do think we do need to keep older people, like very much older people, apologies, off the road. My mother's coming up her 80s. She's beginning to think she might give up her car. Please, if there was an incentive to keep my mother out of her car, I would be grateful. But no, there is to be, the dangerous drivers and the people who kill themselves and their friends are young people, then less so, and then it ticks up again over about 70, 75, 80. And I think, for all our sakes, that's a good reason to incentivise older people to get back on the buses. And the problem is a lot of older people bought cars during COVID when they didn't want to go on the bus. And it's once you have a car, it's difficult to get people out of their car, unless their kids take their keys off them. Vincent, you've long made this case that about what you call the dishonesty of the cycle lobby, and we haven't yet had that detailed conversation, and I'm sure you want to have it. But let's just be honest. Hackney's urban landscape is very different from Hounslow's, which is very different from Calderdale's. And I think, as Simon said, let's get it right for the right kind of places, and let's ensure that Active Travel England have enough resources, as Cycling England did when I did some work for Sustrans 25 years ago, to, the best practice, a library, a resource base of best practice and worst practice, where to learn from mistakes as well as to learn from a good practice. And on aviation, a lot of work has been done over the years on a frequent flyer levy. We need to think about that. So we're not stopping people on low and middle incomes from getting some sun, at least once a year. But is it 12% of UK people are responsible for 75% of journeys by flying, and a bigger proportion of the carbon cost of that. And so many of those journeys could and should be done by train. The business community went online, and friends of family are went online a lot during COVID, and a lot of that remains. So I think there's more to do there. Thank you.
I'm keen to get back to the fourth questions, but Maya, I know you have done some really important research on rural transport, and I'll invite you to speak briefly on that, if that's okay.
I'll be very brief. We did some work looking at transport in rural Scotland, because I think if you can get transport in rural Scotland right, you could probably do it anywhere. And that was we were specifically talking to people about Scotland's target to reduce car miles by 10%, I think, 20%, and 20%. And we were talking to these people living in rural communities, and they were saying, won't ever work in our communities, I need my car. And then later on in the conversation, they would talk about the fact that they drive to the local park and ride and get the bus into their local city. Now that is a car miles reduction, and they do that because the parking's expensive and they don't like driving in the city and there's too many one-way streets. But the choice that they were making is because it was more convenient for them. And this comes back, I think, to your point about how are we framing these interventions, because actually these people were making that choice because it was easier, not because they were thinking about their carbon emissions. Related to that, and this comes a bit, I think, to your point about the cycle lobby, is that these people were saying, if there was an electric bike, and if I could get an electric bike, I'd probably ride around. Other people were saying, well, I don't take the bus because it doesn't feel safe to walk my kids to the bus stop. And this is active travel infrastructure in rural communities, which gets to the sort of multimodal point. And I think you're totally right. I think when we think, people get a bit frozen when we think about rural communities because it feels hard, but there's all sorts of examples of some great community transport examples of, well, I spoke to someone who was saying, oh, well, there's the local bus that takes us all to Tesco on a Tuesday. And I guess I think we just need to be a little bit more creative when we think about rural communities. And I think you're right that we need the data, but we also need to go and talk to people and ask what they need. And it needs to be both of those things. So what is the data telling us, and then what are the people telling us, which comes exactly to your point about it needing to be locally designed and, yeah, and really embedded.
Great, fantastic. We'll open up to some more questions. Just on your left as you come. Yeah, first there, great.
Hi, I'm Herakan Adiogun from the climate charity Possible. We do a lot of work on working with communities to reduce their car use. I've heard from the panel some people are saying, you know, they're agnostic about certain modes and, you know, they've got no love for certain modes. But I think what would be really great for us is to see vision from national government that and kind of admitting that we need to cut car use. So Scotland has a traffic reduction target. Wales, I think, also has. London has. It makes it really difficult for local councils and mayoralities if we're getting one messaging on the local level and different messaging from national government. So, yeah, do you think we could get a national traffic reduction target from Westminster?
Just third in, just on your right with bid. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Dan. I'm from Sustrans. It's funny when you're not the first to mention your own organisation. Thanks so much. We're the evil cycling lobby, but we're also the walking and wheeling lobby. How can we get more people to walk and wheel more journeys?
Fantastic. And to the front here. Oh, you're in competition, aren't you? You've both been catching my eye, so fight it out between you. No, in the pale jacket.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Stephen Ward.
You caught my eye first.
I'm a CLP secretary, Weald of Kent, very rural. I run a global vehicle rating consumer program called Global NCAP. One of the big impediments to active travel is speeding, and that's what is a huge deterrent. As of July this year, all vehicles in the European Union have to have intelligent speed assistance, including trucks, buses, and so on. We have not signed up to this. Costs nothing. It's a Secretary of State's signature on a piece of secondary legislation. And TfL in London are rolling out ISA on all their buses. They've got through a third of it. They've had a 300% reduction in speeding incidents on London buses. You can retrofit. You don't have to wait. It tackles the problem long-term of enforcement, because people say you can't have lower speed limits because of enforcement issues. So ISA is the technology of the future, far more important than autonomous vehicles. Thank you.
No. We're going to cap it at that because we're going to try and get through. So, traffic reduction targets. Simon.
Look, I think my priority is around making sure that people have this menu, this choice, and incentivising that modal shift by ensuring we've got really effective, accessible, affordable public transport and really high-quality active travel infrastructure. I think by putting that in place, people then have the opportunity, can trust, and trust is the big word, they can trust that they can get rid of their car. But until they can trust that the buses are going to turn up on time, that they're not going to suddenly stop or the prices are going to increase overnight, then they're not going to do that. So I think it's around increasing trust in public transport and making sure we've got that high-quality infrastructure. I think that's the way that we can drive that modal shift.
Oliver was nodding there. Oliver.
I mean, I completely agree. Look, look, in this room, it would be really easy for me for Sam to say, look, tax everything, let's get people out of their cars, we've got to get people onto walking, cycling, etc. And that is all true, of course we do. But when I say I'm agnostic about how we do some of that, what I'm trying to say is we all agree we've got to reduce carbon emissions, we've got to get people to be healthier, more active, we've got to give people more freedom and choice. When we start the conversation about how we're going to penalise people to do that, it turns the vast majority of people outside this window off that conversation. Politically, that's very, very difficult for us. And so, look, we all know where we need to get to. It's how we get there that is the challenge. And I think the freedom and choice argument is a much stronger place, but it also projects a confidence about those options. When we start in a place where it's saying we have to penalise people in order to get them out of their car, it undermines our argument to say cycling, walking, active travel, public transport is a better way of travelling. We're saying we're going to force you into that mode rather than offer you the opportunity to do it because it's simply better, more convenient, and helps you to be healthier. So I think we need to be more confident in our assertions, in our arguments. We do need to absolutely give people freedom and choice before we start taking things off people. But we all know where we need to get to. We just need to be more ambitious about getting there as quickly as possible.
Myra and Marcus, I know we've done some work at IPPR about public opinion around transport. It'd be great to just draw on that really briefly, and if that's okay.
Do you want to go first?
You go on, Matt.
Well, people are really keen to see investment in public transport. That comes up again and again and again. And I think there's a point about the sort of penalising people that is challenging. And I think we often think about the framing around bus priority lanes and increasing bus ridership, and you're not saying we're taking people out. You're saying we're just going to make it easier to take the bus. And, you know, there will probably be people who don't like bus priority lanes. We did a piece of work on clean air, and one of the things that the councillors we spoke to said was actually that businesses really don't like that, even though it's going to make life easier and more people on the streets. And I think the public people want their buses to work, and they want to see investment in public transport. And even if you're not explicitly saying we've got a car reduction target, but maybe that's the sort of secret end goal.
Ruth?
Just a couple of examples. One thing that on bus priority networks, we have bus lanes, bus priority in our part of London, and I think all across London. In all of the sort of anti-LTN, anti-segregated cycle path rhetoric from the whatever you call that lobby, pro-car lobby or whatever, nobody has ever said take out the bus lanes. There's never been a call to take out the bus lanes. Which I think is really interesting. And an example in Germany on rural buses that I think I heard from the Conservative leader of Dorset Council. May not be the current leader, but somebody who came to Transport Committee when we were looking at buses. But Dorset's looking at hub and spoke model, so a regular bus service along a key road, and then some kind of spoke linking the villages with trying to work towards a minimum service level. Germany, I don't know whether it's one of the states or across the country, is looking at or has a minimum service for every village in the rural area that we're talking about, one bus an hour during the day. Minimum service in every village.
Marcus, did you want to come in on that?
Yes, I think it comes to the point around, I promise we're not ignoring rural transport, but obviously there isn't kind of just rural and urban, but rurality is very complex, and it really depends. And it's really interesting to hear about the Dorset Council exploring a hub and spoke model. I've spoken to local authorities in the work that we're doing on bus reform, who have two large towns. They can run services commercially viably within them and just route those in a way that covers a significant amount of their rural population. So I think this is where kind of you want to bring together the point around vision with the point around devolution, because ultimately the vision is what should a transport network be doing? And I think starting from there and designing around that, how do we want people in rural areas to access services? What are the opportunities you want to connect them to? And that is where devolution is so critical, and the ability to design your network around the needs of a population. And it does require, I think, a slight shift in thinking away from just seeing public transport as a kind of service in and of itself, but seeing it to an enabler of so much activity in our economy and our society. So I think absolutely we are considering complex rurality. I think devolution is really critical in that, the right funding model that acknowledges some of the difficulties that rural places face. I think things like minimum standards are really important to consider, but again, local manifestation, they're going to look different in different places.
I have to come in here.
Sorry, I'm just conscious Oliver needs to leave in a few minutes. So Anna, is it all right if I'm just going to invite Oliver to make his closing remarks, and then I'll come to you?
Oh, thank you. Well, look, I think I've covered most of the issues that I was hoping to talk about. All I would say is there is a real challenge. I mean, we all know there is a real challenge, but there is also, I think, a huge amount of ambition, and that is exactly what we need to see. For the last 14 years, we have not had that scale of ambition. Just in the last 5 years alone, South Yorkshire has lost 23% of our bus mileage We've gone from spending £7 million a year on tendered bus services in 2019 to £23 million this year. We've gone from a world-class bus network in the 1980s to what is now, frankly, a shadow of its former self. And if we're going to give people that freedom and choice that Simon and I have both spoken about endlessly, we are going to need to invest. That is going to need to take some radical decisions. That is true. But we all know where we want to get to, and the only way through that is through some difficult political choices, but also some conversations with our communities. And I'm really pleased to hear Simon say that local is the default mechanism there, because I know my community best. I always say I look my community in the eye when I make decisions. And so understanding what to do, where to put routes, where to put services, where we will face political support and where there will be those political challenges, something that mayors are able to do. I think devolution gives us the opportunity to absolutely move fast and fix things, and I'm looking forward to seeing just how quickly we can do that working together.
Thank you so much for joining us, Oliver. I totally appreciate you need to run, and that's really, really grateful to have you with us. Thank you so much. Anna, I'll turn to you for some brief remarks. I think if we keep really, really punchy, we've got time for maybe 2 questions, but they have to be promised to be punchy. But Anna, first to you.
Yeah, thank you. So the point I'd like to make is we can't talk about a just transition without addressing businesses, because the responsibility for shifting and reducing emissions cannot just be put on ordinary people. Businesses are responsible for the majority of the CO2 emissions in this country. So, for example, when we look at freight, van traffic has exploded in the last 10 years. The pollution that comes from that, the toxic NOx emissions that cause asthma, cause lung disease, cause heart disease, have rocketed. There's more pollution from them now than there was 10 years ago, even though the vans themselves are polluting less. And the CO2 emissions from van traffic have gone up 60%. That is a scandal. What we really need is a framework to reduce that. Now, a great way to do this, and they're doing this in the Netherlands, is they're setting up zero-emission freight zones. So basically what it means is that by 2030, if you want to deliver to those areas, you have to be doing it zero-emission. Now, of course, one way to do that is to shift it to electric vans. But what is also happening in Holland is that it's turning into a huge cargo bike cycling revolution. So instead of having hundreds of vans on the roads, there are more and more sustainable deliveries happening by cargo bike. And that is better for people, and it's better for cities. It's giving back road space to everyone living in towns. And I think this is something that it has been overlooked massively over the last more than decade of the Conservative government, and it's a real opportunity for the Labour government now.
Thank you. We've had an incredibly patient hand on the front row, so if you keep this punchy, we'll take 2 questions.
Hello, thank you for being here. Ruth Mayorkas from Chiswick. Hello, Ruth. Just to say, last night I missed my last train, and from Aigburth to here to Aigburth, I had to cycle 5 miles on a dual carriageway, which is no fun at all, and I'm 71, and I cycle all the time, so you've got to do something about that. Can you promise me that you will not talk about subsidy with public transport, but call it investment? Because the Tories have always called it investment in roads, subsidy on public transport. We have to lose the idea that it's a subsidy when it's actually an investment in people and health.
Thank you. Okay.
Real ruling.
Oh, one sentence, their question.
Okay. Right. Why are we not getting traction on that? Sorry, yeah. Because of the work I'm doing, I'm coming across a lot of projects that sit in the quadrant of low investment, massive return on investment. So why are we not getting traction on those kind of projects? I had a conversation last night. Battery electric trains deliver a saving of £3.2 billion a year. That's one example. Why we're not doing the link tunnel between HS1 and HS2. That's a £900 million project original value. That's a tenth of the cost of the Lower Thames crossing. That's a relatively low investment, very high return on investment, because we open up the country to international rail connections. We're not just having to get on a plane to go abroad. We can get on a train. There's a number of other projects that are low investment, high return on investment. Why are we not seeing them getting traction? That's the question. Sorry,
Okay, thank you. A long sentence with a pause. I'm going to pause. I'm going to stop there. I'm apologies for so many hands that didn't get to that hopefully chance to chat a little bit after the session. I'm going to just come to Simon and Ruth on this one, and then I'll come to the rest of the panel for closing remarks. So, Simon, Ruth.
First of all, on language, I think you're totally right. I'll take that away, and I will speak to officials on that. I think you're absolutely right. We're investing in public transport, and it's investment for many reasons, whether that's the NHS, for economic growth, for people's health and well-being, mental health. So absolutely. To your question, 11 weeks. We've been in 11 weeks, and in those 11 weeks, we've announced 5 transport bills.
Yeah.
We've already cleared. We've already cleared the Commons with the rail bill to start and bring railway companies back into public ownership. That'll be followed by a more substantive railway bill to establish Great British Railways in the future. We've already put a statutory instrument to ensure that all local transport areas can look at franchising. We are hitting the ground running, and we are, working fast and fixing things. But of course, we have to be really careful here. We do have this massive black hole, and we do need to look very carefully at the projects that were promised, and to look again at the merits of those proposals for infrastructure. And we're doing that. We're reviewing that very carefully. But I take on board what you're saying. Work is underway, and of course, we'll work quickly and fix things.
Okay.
No, I get that.
So, Ruth, on investment, and then we'll take Marcus, Maya, Anna, Ruth, and then Simon, if you'd like to close with a final thought. If you'd like to answer the question, and then we'll come to you for closing remarks.
Yes, I agree on investment and the terms, and on all sorts of ways in transport. How growth happens in the context of the economic inheritance we've had after 14 years of mismanagement. But on the other hand, particularly I've met so many people this week, it's only been 3 days, but who, private sector, willing and able to invest. They want certainty, they want strategic perspective, and they want consistency of decision making. 2 slightly smaller points. One is, if you want to get behaviour change, look at behaviour change models that work. Maybe a batch of free tickets or a week's free travel to get people out of their car and onto buses or something like that. London provides free cycle training for adults, sort of almost like an adult version of Bikeability. I'm not sure you get a certificate at the end of it, but I know people who have never, particularly in women, I'm not going to cycle, not on London's roads. They do a course and they go, actually, Ruth, yes, you're right, it wasn't that bad, or it's not as bad as I thought it was. The other little point, sorry, going back to my mother, please don't take this back to her if you're from Birmingham, but when she comes to stay with me in London, she really likes our buses in London because there are 2 doors, so there's not that crush. She doesn't like that crush. Also, the driver behaviour about start-stop, although electric buses do inherently have a jagged start-stop, but it's interesting, she won't use the buses in Birmingham because the design is not something she enjoys riding. Luckily, she's got access to the tram. But anyway, I just thought that's a little thought to take back. Listening to passengers.
I want your mum to join the Transport Select Committee.
We'll invite her for the...
I think that could be really interesting.
You're going to get my mum as an advisor.
Brilliant.
Next year's panel, Ruth's mum and Ruth in conversation. Fantastic.
Brilliant.
So we're drawing to the end of the session. I will invite some closing remarks. So Mark, if we can keep them punchy.
Thanks, Becca. I think actually the question that Ruth at the front asked around talking about subsidy over investment is part of that wider point I was making around the shift in how we think about transport to that really underpinning enabler of so much. And I think you know, we've heard really clearly how the government has a tricky economic inheritance from colleagues on the panel, but I would encourage people to see transport as a way out of some of our difficulties, as an enabler of growth, of tackling those social issues, accompanied by wider integration with other departments, not just people in here who are interested, but people in other panels talking about health, talking about poverty. That devolved role is so critical, and it needs backing up with convincing Treasury that they need to put investment into our transport network to really reap those rewards that we all know are there.
Maya.
Similar to Marcus, I'm looking forward to working alongside a government that is showing vision. Perhaps in the critical friend role sometimes we'll be sharing our paper on active travel investment. But I think it's exciting to be, it's really great to be thinking about transport beyond just ways of moving people around the country, and how we can think about transport, exactly as you were saying, as an enabler for health and for opportunity and for safer streets. Yeah, I'm sort of looking forward to working with and pushing you to be bolder and move faster.
Anna.
Look, at a panel event last Sunday, Luke Murphy said to us, regulation makes markets, and without proper regulation on shared mobility, that market will just not take off, and it's a market that doesn't cost the government anything. So really, can we please have some regulation to make sure that it's not illegal to use electric mobility on our roads while huge SUVs go around scot-free, let's say. That would really be great. And you know, let's tax the pollution where we can to fund all the great projects that I think across the panel speakers we all really want to see.
There's some noises of agreement here coming from Ruth on that, so that's fantastic. So, Ruth, final thoughts or final, what would your mum say?
Haven't you said enough? That's what my mum would say.
Simon, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No.
Fantastic.
I've really enjoyed it, and of course, you know, critical friendships are really important, and I think, you know, transport is at the centre of this mission-led government, and I hope we've demonstrated that, as I said, with the speed at which we've been delivering on our transport plans.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, this panel was called Transforming How We Travel, and it certainly feels like we're talking about some transformational stuff, not just for people's travel, but for people's lives as well. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your fantastic questions. I'm really pleased to draw this session to a close. So thank you very much for joining us.